Good morning. Welcome to another edition of our Family Finance segment on the Family Month on Citi Breakfast Show. For the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about investing for the family and financial planning. This week, we're moving the discussion into one specific important area: education. Most families need to plan for their education, but how do they go about it? We're very privileged to have a woman whose job makes her one of the most important people in that sector. Mrs. Sheila Naah-Boamah is the Chief Executive Officer of the Students Loan Trust Fund, and she has a very strong financial background, which we are going to tap into this morning. How do we plan for the education of our family? What are the considerations to make? What are the permutations? And what are the benefits of planning for your children's education? Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Madam. Good morning.
Good morning, Bernard, and thank you for having me.
Well, before we get into the discussion, just a few things about you. So, you are the Chief Executive of the Students Loan Trust Fund. What is the Student Loan Trust Fund, and what do you people do there?
Thank you very much, and good morning again to your listeners. At the Student Loan Trust Fund, we support Ghanaian eligible tertiary students with some funding to enable them pursue higher education. We also recover the money when they are due. And so basically and simplistically, we provide financial support to Ghanaians who are attending any form of tertiary education in Ghana.
Interesting. That makes you a good person to talk to about this topic. So we want to start by asking, why do we even need to talk about planning for education? Why is it an important conversation to have?
Yes, Bernard, thank you. I'm also sitting in as a parent myself, and so having to come and present this got me thinking. It actually also got me talking to various people on how they are going through this phase of providing for their children's lifelong education. And so thank you once again, and I'm happy to be here. We know culturally we have been socialized to think that the education of our children would be catered for by a larger group, by the family at large. And so as this is evolving as a result of a lot of pressure on families, the definition of who your family is now reducing to the nuclear family. And so that expectation that your kids' education can be taken care of by the rich uncle or the rich auntie is diminishing. And so it's important that we start thinking or having that discussion at about now.
Okay.
It's also important because of education, we are beginning to start families late.
True.
And so once you start a family late, then you need to be planning, because it means that you may get into retirement when your kids are still in school. And so making available resources to see them through, not forgetting your own back aches and toothache pains with retirement is important. And so planning must set in early enough. Also, and importantly, is the fact that we have different income homes.
Okay.
Some homes are supported by a single breadwinner, others are supported by a double income. And so these dynamics are important to note as a family, and to plan with the total resource envelope to ensure that if there is any sudden disruption in any of the income levels, the kids at least are protected to attain their capable educational milestones.
So far, we've spoken about the rapidly changing definition of family, the whole idea of late childbirth, which gives you a shorter time to plan, and then the whole idea of whether it's a single income or a double income. Are those the only reasons, or are there other points?
I think it's also good to plan because it focuses the family on the educational needs of their kids. You know, hitherto, and before I started this, I know I've done some thinking about my children's education, but this particular preparing for this actually sent it a mile further, because I said you don't just have to think about it vaguely, you actually have to cost it for it to make sense in the long run. And so those are some of the things that are important, and that is why it's great that you have initiated the discussion at this time.
So let's go into the topic. education is very broad, so I'm sure you divide it into various phases. Are there specific things parents should expect as far as funding the education of their children in various stages? So, for example, we have nursery. These days we have primary, junior high school before the tertiary. Talk to me about those stages and what the challenge and expectation should be for the various stages.
As a parent myself, and from the Ministry of Education, work an agency under the Ministry of Education, and in the 21st century, more importantly, there are certain expectations parents would expect from their educational provider, in addition to academic excellence. Academic excellence, it's one, but what else do we need our kids to have? And so, between primary and junior high, where it's usually between, they would say 4 to 14, but I would say 1, because we are so busy these days. If we had opportunity, 3 months, we'll drop them in school. Yeah, so I would say 1 to 14. What are we looking for from the decisions we make with respect to which school are we sending them? So in addition to providing your kids with the educational, academic credentials, you expect them to also teach the kids some strong ethics and values, because that is the stage they are forming, their formative years that we always put it. So it's important that the place that they are learning is also instilling in them some strong ethics and values. You also expect the school to be able to, at this time, teach the kids to take pride in what they do, and therefore build their confidence in whatever they are aspiring to do. You also expect an institution that would teach the kids to develop their curiosity. And so in the way the teaching and learning is even provided, it must be such that they are not shut down, they are encouraged to be curious. And so those type of traits are also important in that, at that level of education. You would also require that we are very busy these days, and so even things as critical as habits, you want the school to be, inculcating, young as they may be, the right habits and ability to survive 21st century requirements, multicultural, multi-religious, multi-whatever. And so kids must know from the beginning and at very early ages that they must be accommodating of people's differences. And some of those traits must develop at the institution from those early ages.
And so, based on these needs, it looks like you need to decide whether you need to take your child to a public school or a private school or a Montessori type of school. So, having known the components of the outcome of the level of education, it means you must make a decision.
Yes, of course.
But what must go into that decision?
So now that you know what you expect your education provider to be giving you for that age category, you would decide based on several other factors, including your earning capacity, whether it must be a private institution, whether it must be a public institution, whether it must be a Montessori or an international. We have, I think there's a difference between the Montessori and the international schools like the British International, GIS and what have you. And so depending on other dynamics, you would decide that which institution is best. Even in the public schools, you can decide if it should be religious based or not, based on what you as a family or parent expect to be building for your child at that level.
I get the impression that a lot of people think when you take a child to kindergarten or first few years in school, it shouldn't be too expensive because this is just kids and they expect that school fees will rise the higher you go. But when you go around asking how much does it cost to even send your child to certain schools, you'll be surprised. They are quoting in dollars and people are paying thousands of dollars for 3-4-year-old kids. So I'm not too sure what's going on there. Do you need to put more money in at the early stage generally, or it must get more expensive as you get towards university?
Bernard, this is a very good question, and I think that what parents, that's why I decided to talk about what the institution is given. So you must not be looking at cost. It is not the fanciful building that would deliver the ethics. It is not the, it's not those things that deliver the attributes you need in your child in addition to. So you, the parent, must do your homework and find out if the school is delivering these critical things you need. And if it goes at 10 Ghana, so be it. You must be prepared to say that I trust that my child would get these things which are more important, and so for that reason I take my children to this school. And so for me, you shouldn't say the more expensive it is, the better the school.
So there's a false assumption that more expensive schools are better, which
Yes.
is not necessarily proven.
Which is not, because I have personal experience of having taken my kids to both types. Currently my kids are in a Catholic school, and I made that decision having thought through what I'm looking for in their children. I realized that it's very challenging these days bringing up kids. The moral and social fiber of society is becoming very difficult to survive in. And so I needed some support in terms of religious upbringing. I needed an institution that had discipline. I needed an institution that would give me some of the things I've talked about. And that was what drove my decision, not necessarily cost. In the past, I had them at an expensive school where when they misbehaved, they wrote it down and waited for me. And that is not what I want. When I come and I'm punishing, it's too late. For me, I and my husband, we felt that it was important that discipline is given immediately so that they can remember, and then moving forward, we get it right. We are hoping that we are making the right choices to get it right in the long run.
Brilliant. We're talking to the Chief Executive of the Students Loan Trust Fund in our Family Finance series. And this morning, we're talking about planning for the education of your family. And she's broken our presentation down, Mrs. Sheila Naah-Boamah, into preschool, junior high, and senior high. So 1 to 14 is the first stage, and you've given us the characteristics. Let's talk about the next stage before we come to permutations and money issues. So when you talk about post-junior high, what are we looking at in terms of parents' expectations?
Great. Post-junior high, this is the level where they are beginning to mature. This is the level where, in addition to academics, they must start thinking critically. They must be solution driven. They must be able to collaborate and negotiate. They must be able to take responsibility for their action because they are becoming adults. And so you need an institution, and more importantly, this is the time that they will be building schoolmates or old boys or classmates, networks. This is where it starts from. I would be surprised if people's current networks in career is emanating from primary school or creche. But that is not where normally it will start. It will start in your senior high to the university and beyond. Those are the friends you take into the job place and build networks with. And so the decision as to which school they are going should be one that is providing some of these things because they are important in his or her next phase in life. And so again, in addition to academics, which is very important, they must be taught to be critical thinkers. They must be solution oriented. You know that they must be able to accommodate diversity. They must be able to take responsibility for their actions and inactions such that they don't need a cane to go and learn. They can learn without supervision because they understand the importance of studying, and they must have empathy and respect for others. And importantly, they must communicate effectively. We have become a very commercialized environment, nationally and globally. And so whether you are a doctor, an engineer, or a salesperson, you must have communication skills to be able to perfect or deliver whatever profession you go into with perfection. And so it's important that at this level, the institutions they are going to, the decision on which institution they would go to would also be influenced by some of these characteristics.
So academic credentials, critical thinking skills, forming of networks, developing empathy, communication skills, and all of these things. So putting this together, what you said about the early years, what are the various permutations? Because now we are going to talk about how to decide. So break it down for me. What are the options available, and how do you know where you stand with these options?
So this is where, and the good thing about the whole process of planning for your children's education is that it's a private activity, and so you don't have to falsify anything. You can be as honest as possible to yourself, and so you are able to tell yourself that based on my earnings, this is what I can do. And so you would have to make the decision whether it will be a public throughout their education life. You would have to tell yourself, decide whether you would want to take them to a private school for the beginning, a public school, because we know per the Ministry of Education's record that at the senior high level and the university levels, the best institutions are all public institutions. And so if you also draw on some of those trends, you can decide that irrespective of your reservations with some government agencies, for this particular product, they deliver it to the best, and so I'll take my children there. You can also decide that, you know what, I want my kids to study abroad in the next level, and so for that reason they need to get the tuition style of abroad institutions very early, and for that reason from the very beginning you would take them through a certain type of training, because ultimately they are going to fit in an environment that is different. Or you can just say, you know what, I want them to build certain networks that are not national. Well, Ghana is yes, so I want them to belong to the international group, and so throughout their academic life they would do only international schools, but it's all based on your financial muscle as well.
So it's not just the consideration of whether you want them to go abroad later and therefore they must get the international tuition, but you must look at your money too.
Exactly, and look at your money accurately, honestly.
Can we say that if you did like public for preschool, public for senior high, and public for university, that's the cheapest option in terms of cost? Is that clear?
I think it is clear, and I must add that some people feel that that would not deliver results, but I have known an instance, and in fact it is one of the reasons why I stopped thinking that the most expensive provider is the best place with a fanciful infrastructure. That is why I stopped leaning too much in that direction, where I have seen somebody evidence-based take children through public education and excelled to the extent that at the university they had an instant scholarship at a very minimal cost. And so it tells us that it is not all about how much we spend as parents, even though for some people it's more about what you want to get from educational systems.
Interesting stuff. So public is the cheapest, but if you compare private university to private, say, preschool, are you able to compare and say which is more expensive?
You know, even within the private institutions, costs vary. And so first of all, once you have, that's why for me, I think that let's look at the decision based on the outcomes. Then you narrow it down into which institutions deliver it best, and not necessarily about is it private, is it public, is it international. For me, what is critical is what do you want your child to achieve, and then whichever vehicle would deliver it, be it a Range Rover or a Beetle, please put them in there.
But of course, when it comes to university, apart from the tuition, there's living expenses, and there's even travel if the person has to travel and all of that. So take us through a model of making this decision, or how did you do it yourself? You have your income, you have your spouse's income, you have the school fees. How do you organize yourself to make the decision?
So now that you have decided, assuming let's go for the cheapest, it's public throughout, and you have looked at closely the earning capacity of the family, you are able to tell whether based on the total earnings you are a super rich household, you are a rich household, you are a growing middle class that many of us belong to, or others. So if you are, let's concentrate on the rich downwards, because for the super rich, no matter what happens in their life, the kids would always be taken care of because there's enough for everyone. But for the rich below, according to Ghana standards, we are not comparing Ghana to Nigeria, because I'm sure if you make those comparisons, we would be dwarfed in terms of resources. So we are just looking at information within our context. So for that reason, the rich people in Ghana, even though let's assume, for them, I still think that if something sudden happens to their resources over a prolonged period, it can affect something as basic as children's education, depending on where they started. Because many of them per our observation, would be in some of these international, very expensive schools. So for them, the cost of funding that education is a significant part of the pie. And so, depending on where you fit, then you would then put the cost together. Definitely, like you said, it would be the total cost from preschool to university times the number of children times living expenses. Then you get a figure. Then now you plan, how am I going to make up for this figure to make sure that it is ring fenced, as we will say at the Ministry of Finance. It is ring fenced, and no matter what happens, if my kids have the capability, they would still go through successfully. And so that is some of the discussion couples or homes or families must start having with all seriousness.
At which point do you start making this decision? Is it when you set out to have a family, or when you've decided, I don't know, when the kids start growing up, or is that an ideal time to start making having this conversation?
Bernard, the cost implication of taking your kids to school can vary and vary significantly. And so for me, once you plan to get married to somebody, you need to start understanding these things. You need to start talking about them. Where would our kids school? What do we expect from schools? And then it's shaping how much you would need. And so you're able to tell that collective between you and your spouse, whether you can come up with that money comfortably. If not, what are the difficult decisions you have to take? Are you going to forgo living in a gated apartment for a flat because you want to save so much for your kids to have this type of education? So for me, I think that once you know as a couple that you are going to take this journey, lifelong journey together, you need to start having this very important discussion about the future of the generation you are bringing into existence.
In my previous interviews on this show, it's very clear that the household income is divided into a number of things. So rent, accommodation, food, health, education, and all that. Is there an ideal percentage of your income that you go into education? Is that possible to?
No.
It depends.
No, it depends on your expectations, on your choices, on your decisions, on the income itself.
So you cannot have an ideal. All right. So give me various options. So you've planned, you've calculated, you know how much it's going to cost. Is it just your salary, or what are the other ways or options of funding your education that are available in the country?
This is where honesty plays a very big role, and that is where everybody must lay the total earnings. So it's not just the salary that you come up with on the paycheck, but every other source of income must come, so that we know how much totally that household is able to generate. And so once we've made the decision, then we can look at a mix of options to arrive at the final total that is ring fence for that purpose. And so having talked to some people, how are you planning for your kids' education? Some have said we have a savings plan, which is fantastic. Others have said we have an insurance policy, which is also great. And so, of course, there is the Students' Loan Trust Fund. So if you want to add that to your mix of planning, at least it can take care of their living expenses when they get to that level. And interestingly, the student loan is available to both public and private tertiary institutions. And so it's not limiting once you are Ghanaian and you would school in Ghana. So people can decide from the early ages that we want our kids to take financial responsibility or to learn some financial discipline at this stage, and so they would also be responsible or accountable for a part of their education by taking the student's loan to cater for their living expenses, remembering very well that we didn't start making babies at 18 but rather 32. And so we must also be catering for, like I said, the back aches and the took aches, because when you get there, your kids will still be in school, and so they are not able to take care of you like we always thought would happen. And so when you are falling ill, which happens with aging, and you don't have the financial support after all the years of work, and then your kids are also demanding, it can be very stressful. And so planning for some of these things way ahead and giving it some thought can, create a lot of family peace and sanity.
So it looks like planning for education is actually family planning, because you need to tell yourself, how many kids do I need to have? How many years do I have to work? And will my child be in JSS when I retire?
Yeah.
So that those who have pension babies have to be very careful, because it could really worry them in terms of how they cater for these kids.
Yeah, you're right, Bernard, and it does. And the truth of the matter is, we hardly think about it and plan for it. We just have the babies and hope that the God takes care of the birds. He will take care of us. We all have those very beautiful slogans, but on the ground, you see people suffer from the effects of not planning for some of these uncertainties, and so, as a generation, we need to start looking at how we can plan for it, because yes, God takes care of the birds, but we also have to plan for unforeseen circumstances.
So there's the education saving plan, there's the insurance policy, there's the student loan. What else is there in terms of options?
Yeah, there are grants. A lot of institutions have some grant packages. Many parents are not aware that their kids can benefit from grants, and kids are also not being proactive, because they know that when they cough, their parents will bring the money. They do not understand that some parents have to go and take loans at very high rates, and so once you plan early, your child is from the very beginning knows that, when I get to this level, these are the things, this is my responsibility to the whole process. And so he or she would be proactive in terms of taking responsibility for their side, and that allows you space to also cater for the ones you have to, and leave some for your pension or retirement.
Are scholarships a useful option, or because the criteria are so varying, you can't put your hope on scholarships?
Definitely, you can't put your hopes on scholarships, because scholarships are limited. Two scholarships are based on the IQ of the child, and interestingly, we cannot guarantee that our kids will turn out with a certain level of intelligence. It is the hope and aspiration of every child that my child will be a doctor. But when you grow up being an alcoholic, it's a difficult time to be. But parents must know that the outcome of your child is not necessarily based on what a good parent you are. There's several other factors, because if not, then why would a pastor's child, for example, not make it, with all the prayers at home? So there are several other factors that go into a successful child, which is everybody's dream, beyond academics. And when your child doesn't have that intellectual IQ capacity, then a scholarship definitely would be a difficult dream to aspire for.
So if this is done well, what should happen? What are if somebody plans the education well, give us a sense of what success looks like for a well-planned family's education.
What success looks like is, if it's done well, is that when there is a sudden disruption in the earnings of the breadwinner, most importantly, the kids' education is covered.
Okay.
And so kids who are capable would get the opportunity to go through the full length of their potential without any disruption. There are several very heartbreaking issues of people extremely intelligent who have had to drop out because some parent passed, unfortunately, or lost their jobs, and all those very traumatic experiences. So some of these things are highly avoidable. We must know that if it's happened to somebody, it can happen to you. And so the essence of planning, even though we don't expect it to happen, is that should it happen, we are prepared to minimize the pain because we have planned for it. It also makes sure that like I said, once you start planning early, and if you happen again to be unfortunate to start giving birth late like some of us did, then you are planning for the stage your kids would be whilst you're going on retirement, and you're also planning for your various hospital visits so that you don't expect your children who are in school to be paying for bills because they can't afford it, and it doesn't create a lot more pain in the family and conflict sometimes.
So the sudden disruptions can be catered for, and then there's money available to support the child's career goals throughout all the stages.
Yeah.
And then basically you'll be successful. You haven't spoken about postgraduate education. Is that because that's not the family's responsibility? That's more the individual's own responsibility?
Yes, I think that yes, you're right, because by the time your child is doing a postgraduate, you would expect that the child would be out of your doors. I mean, you don't expect to keep them beyond a certain age, because you would expect them to have taken, their lives should have taken shape for them to be able to handle those responsibilities in addition to theirs. And I would therefore hope that a successful child is one who would have been capable enough to handle that kind of expenditure at that age.
In conclusion, would you recommend talking to an expert? Because this looks more like a self-help presentation where it's your responsibility. You sit at home with your spouse and do it. Can you go and talk to some investment person? Can you go and talk to some counselor or advisor? Because finances and, for example, putting money into an educational fund, understanding some of the returns may not be very easy. Do you recommend getting an expert to advise persons on this?
What I recommend is that there are some loopholes in terms of facilities available, in terms of education, savings plan, in terms of insurance. They seem to have been packaged in a very fanciful way, but when you go to the nitty-gritty of it, it may not be delivering the kind of expectations you want because of the time value of money and what have you. And so I think that the financial institutions and the insurance companies must take up the responsibility of putting information out there on what it is their products are delivering, for us to critically, interrogate those products and make sure that, yes, if I put my money in this for 5 years, at the end of the 5 years, it would have materialized enough to be able to cater for education this way. If not, why don't I go and put it in an estate agent and be doing susu with them? By the time that time reaches, it's a whole house. It would have appreciated. I would get more. So let's be informed. Let's be educated. I don't want to talk about the various and try and market anybody. I want them to take up that responsibility of putting information out there so that some of us who are going to start this process know where to be putting our money.
Exciting. So in conclusion, what are your final comments for our listeners today?
In conclusion, I would want to say, what you are told, you will definitely forget. What you are shown, you will remember. But what you do, you will always understand. So people should start planning. They should start practicing to plan for their children's education.
Fascinating stuff from the Chief Executive Officer of the Students Loan Trust Fund, Sheila Naah-Boamah, on planning for the education of your family throughout the various stages to tertiary. And she's taken us through why we need to have this conversation, what parents can expect from the various levels of education. She took us through some interesting permutations, not in, out, in, as in residents and non-resident, but basically private, public, international, and all those mixtures. And then also some options you can fall on, but ultimately it's your responsibility. As she said, what you do is what you understand. Thank you very much for talking to me.